And we are back and recording. So now we're going to look at, the other weapon, or the other part of the weapon combination, which is the pistol. Pew pew. So yeah, in my case, I'm using a Nerf gun. I think I mentioned earlier, but it's probably worth mentioning again. The barrel on this is a lot shorter than the barrel on a historical pistol, but I don't have a historical pistol. I have this Nerf gun. Where that's going to become significant is the way the pistol is used in the system, secondarily to just for shooting, is as a parrying device. And when you have a parrying device, the length of the parrying device matters greatly in terms of, how much you can protect and how much you can parry. All right, so the first bit of advice that Pringle-Green gives us with regards to pistols, he says the tradition in the British military is the pistol is fired from the right hand, put away, either dropped, he said either it's dropped or at the very least put away, at which point the cutlass is pulled out of the sash and the people go running board. And, that is that is in the context of a battle time consuming. When milliseconds make a difference, it means that you're taking a while to change weapons, which then has the knock-on problem that if you're going to fire your pistol, you're going to fire it from very far away, from out of range. And pistols in this period didn't have very good accuracy at all. They were very much a close-range weapon. So, and what he also says is, if people are boarding, like particularly if you've got people who are crawling around the sides or climbing up the sides of the enemy ship, they have to shoot their pistols before that, whilst they're still on your ship, because otherwise, there's no way they can climb up the enemy ship, whip out their pistol, fire it, drop it or put away, then whip out their cutlass without being set upon. So yeah, he basically says, what you need to do instead is you need to train your troops to fire the pistol in their left hand. He says, this can be done by drilling. So one thing he says is that cutlass and pistol are a set, or when he talks about how many cutlasses a ship has, he doesn't say this many cutlasses. He says this many cutlasses and pistols. As far as he's concerned, this is a weapon system. This is a combination system that goes together. But what he says is you should learn to shoot in your left hand so that your Nerf dart falls out. And unfortunately, I do need that later. And then, because what that means is that when people shoot, they can do so when they're very close to the enemy, when they're just outside of cutlass range. But then they've still got their cutlass out, so they can still fence and defend themselves. And to get a sense of how close Pringle-Green thinks you should fire the pistol, the defense he depicts again with Cutlass against bayonet is basically, he says, or he doesn't say, he has a picture depicting this, is you sweep down, you parry a thrust, and fire your pistol. So you can imagine this is the strangest thing to lose, but I've lost all of my spears. But you've got basically your opponent is, 6 foot away, is, maybe a bit under 2 meters. If we're, betraying Her Majesty and using the French, revolutionary France's idea of the metric system. So very, very close range weapon. And he says once the pistol is expended, it becomes a parrying device. So what you do is you flip the pistol around your hand, you grip it by the handle so that the barrel of the pistol is down in front of your forearm. And what you do is you stick it above your head. At a slight angle, you want your shoulder to be, or your upper arm to be not horizontal, because that would put the pistol in front of your face. You don't want a vertical, because that would put the pistol far too far back to be used. You want it about halfway between, so it's sitting out in front of you. Your forearm is up at kind of this angle. You don't want this, because that's too far back and could miss. This is forward and, you know, will cover you. And he says you want it basically on this angle, so your hand should be above, you know, the opposite side of your head. So you're covering the high, you know, your high inside line with your pistol. The reason for that is Pringle-Green says this is the cut that most people will do. So if you close off that line, you've pretty much ruined their day, ruined their game plan. You sit there. His basic guard he depicts is this. So the sword, you know, the sword or cutlass in head guard, the pistol guarding the head, and then you fence from here, basically holding the pistol up. He's not quite clear how much you're meant to lie in this versus how much, you know, you transition to it. I actually think, I mean, personally, I think, and based on his depiction of a single time defense, you'd actually be better off, you'd actually be better off bringing the pistol to a parry as you attack. Again, a lot of my assumptions about this are from me having fenced experienced fencers who know what they're doing, which is kind of why when I saw Pringle-Green's system, I'm like, oh gosh, this seems not great because it's really simplistic and, you know, is not as good as more I guess more detailed fencing methods from the same period, but it's a basic system so that people, you know, so that, you know, you can teach someone in 20 minutes, as opposed to something that takes 3-4 hours of fencing lessons. British systems were, like, even by period standards, quite concise, you know, very much just get the hang of it and go out and about. Much the way like a sport, really. You know, you don't want to spend more than like a couple of hours learning how to play cricket before you go out and play cricket or soccer or rugby or whatever. Same deal with British fencing systems. You don't want to be doing hours and hours of lessons before you can actually start fencing, but you want to go out and play. All right, so what you can do, when you're on a board, when you fired your pistol, you know, you brought it down, someone's coming at you, they come up, and what you do, you bring your pistol, you launch your attack at the same time. So I'm going to go from a left guard, just because that's kind of convenient for demonstration purposes. But I go up, parry, and counterattack. That's one motion. Parry and counterattack. All right, so get you to just follow along. So if you remember your attack and lunge, I want you to start with just everything. Low and relaxed to really get the hang of this from, but it helps to learn it from here. So you can get into that idea again of transitioning to a position to achieve a goal. Same way that we transition between cuts and parry and cuts and guards to achieve a goal. With this, we're transitioning from just running around with our gear to being in combat mode. So I'm just going to, again, bring my pistol up to the pistol position. I throw a cut, and I throw a cut on the lunge. So I'm just going to call, what am I going to call this? I'm just going to call lunge, fuck it. And I want you to try and do, and we're just going to do it all in one smooth movement. So lunge, lunge. Actually, one thing I should do is we're going to come back to this guard because coming back to a resting guard is a dumb idea. But, all right, lunge, 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 lunge. Don't hit your roof. Lunge and lunge. All right, so that's pretty much the entirety of the pistol stuff in Pringle-Green. I haven't had the chance yet to experiment with this in sparring with pistol and offhand weapon with, you know, sort of more complicated cutlass systems from the period. You know, my traditional, well, if you want to see a British cutlass system, there's a link to our playlist from about a month ago where I did a lesson on just solo cutlass in the Facebook event, but I'll repost it after this. But yeah, my traditional guard is either this, the tierce guard, or this, the medium guard, one or two. I can't use them both. But certainly with these kinds of guards, having the pistol low and bringing it to a position is more efficient, or I find works better than just sitting with it on this line. With it here, all that really does is tell my opponent, okay, they can't, or tells them two things. It'll either tell them that they can't attack on that line, so they're going to attack somewhere else, which is useful for me, knowing that, well, of the 4 quadrants my opponent might attack in, high inside, high outside, low inside, low outside, they're not necessarily going to attack me on the high inside. But the other problem is that I find a lot of people are going to start stabbing at my forearm in the hopes that I'm not expecting to be attacked in that quadrant. My solution to that, honestly, would just, if they stab at your forearm, is just retract your forearm and have a crack at them with a nice big open attack that's going to be hard for them to parry because, well, they committed. So I might show you that just from tierce guard, which is this guard. My opponent stabs at my my sword. I lunge, but there's a little trick to it. I turn my back foot and face my toes. I turn my back foot, but I'm still facing my toes towards my opponent so that I'm moving at an angle. So, angle. The way I change my orientation is I change the orientation of my back foot. So if I want, so in this case, because I'm wanting to move up to an angle, my opponent decides to take a stab at my arm. I angle out and take a stab at them. Also pull my hand away. So, hand away, angle out, and take a stab at them. And this is a big wide stab. So let's practice it again. Angle and stab. 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 And angle and stab. So yeah, so that's kind of my addition to the, if I'm using the pistol in my offhand as a parrying device kind of method. But yeah, Pringle-Green basically just says, he says just sit it here so it's a parrying device because that's what it can be used at. But some of this, like the illustrations and the way he talks about auto action, imply that you can do it as an active thing you move to free up your sword to get in. I'm going to move and ask questions, but while you think of your questions, there's just one other point that probably needs to be covered in terms of 19th century fencing theory, which is the ideas of opposition and absence. So when you're attacking, you traditionally attack in what's called opposition, where I put my sword out in front of me and I'm basically I want my opponent's sword sitting about here so that as I come in, I'm pushing it out I'm, if not pushing it out of the way, at the very least covering myself so that my opponent temporarily can't just launch an attack straight at me. They have to deal with my attack first. So the idea of opposition is I'm covering myself as I come in. The way I like to think of it is parrying forward. So if this is my inside or my cart parry, my attack is just that but extended. Parrying forward to come in. Attacking in absence, on the other hand, is when I don't form opposition. I am not covering myself with my sword. So a cut in absence can be as simple as that, where you see how my sword's not in front of me, opposition, absence, but more often it's stuff like I come in with a thrust, my hand turned out, so my sword is well out there. My opponent's sword would have to be nowhere near me, nowhere near being a threat to me for this to actually be covering me against it, in which case, what's the point? I can also go with false edge attacks, where I'm not really covering myself, but I'm relying on an unorthodox angle or just speed, or having my opponent committed to something to come in with a false edge. But the advantage of the false edge attack is, or the advantage of an attack in absence is it's a lot harder to parry. So when I've got a parrying device like a pistol, and this is something I think Pringle-Green really relies on as a way of getting less experienced or very inexperienced fencers to be competitive with experienced fencers, is if you parry and come in with a very, very open, or like a very in absence cut, a very wide cut that then comes through, you're safe because you've parried with the pistol, and your attack's more likely to land. If it's in absence, it's not going to it's not going to intersect with your opponent's sword at all, making it harder for them to parry it. Doubly so because they've already committed to an action when they're already cutting whilst you're attacking them. And attacks in absence are fairly rare because normally they're a really bad idea. Because if you don't have something to parry, an offhand weapon to parry with, you can be countercut very easily. But that also means there's something that experienced fencers aren't necessarily used to. And this is something I found actually when I started fencing people with very little experience. They throw these big, wide attacks in absence that, and it was they were a lot harder to parry because they were big and wide, and I wasn't used to people attacking me like that, and that was a real problem for me until the point where I realized I could just countercut them. All right, so I'm just gonna come back, take a seat, and are there any questions? That's looking like a no, so I'm just going to pause recording before we move on to move on to the next section of the talk where I talk about parrying with other weapons. So.